Let's start by, if you don't mind, I know your name is Anne Williams.
Yes,
I don't know whether you've got a middle name.
I have. It's Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Yes,
Is that after?
both my grandmothers.
Okay. Can you tell me now where and when you were born?
Yes, I was born in Hastings just before the outbreak of the Second World War, April 1939.
My goodness. Okay, so that was a rather difficult time, I should imagine, but you wouldn't have known much about
I wouldn't. No,
Okay, and your
fine.
parents?
My parents, my father was a bank clerk
Mhm.
and my mother was a teacher. Although, of course, at that time, if you were married, you couldn't remain as a teacher.
Oh, why was that?
Oh, it had been the law for a long time. So
I
when
didn't
my
know.
mother went to teachers training college, she had friends who had to decide either whether they wanted to pursue a career or get married.
Well.
Same applied to my mother-in-law,
Really?
who was a teacher.
Oh,
And it
crikey.
wasn't until war broke out and so many men were called up that married women were allowed to teach.
Well. You learn something every day. Oh, okay. And so Anne Elizabeth Williams, born in 1939 in Hastings,
Yes,
and obviously had two parents.
yes.
Can you tell me what did your father do? He was a bank clerk, you
He was a
said,
bank clerk with
Yeah.
Lloyd's Bank.
with Lloyd's Bank.
Yes.
Oh, the Black Horse. And your
Yes.
mum, when did she restart teaching?
Oh, not until I was in my teens.
Oh, okay. So you started school probably in 1942?
No. I didn't go to school until 1945. I was 6.
Right. Okay. So you didn't go to sort of like they do today, the preschools.
Well, there were very few children around, you see. They'd been evacuated. So there were very few children around. And I think my mother was probably asked to go back to teaching, but she didn't because she'd got a very small child. But she did have a group in the house, which I really can't remember much about, of the 1 or 2 children who did still live there. And she must have run a small sort of play group. I
Oh,
don't know, maybe 1 morning, 2 mornings a week, but I have really no recollection of it.
okay. And if you think back to your school days, 6 years old, it's quite late to start school in modern
Yes,
times.
yes,
What subjects did you sort of really like?
none. I can't remember much. I mean, we'd moved by then.
Right.
We spent the wartime in Hastings,
Yes.
in St Leonard's, which is part of Hastings, and I can remember that. I mean, a lot of families had shelters. We didn't. We had no shelter, indoors or outdoors. You hid under the kitchen table, which would have been a fat lot of good.
Well, didn't they used to have Anderson
Yes, we didn't
shelters?
have
But you didn't have one of those?
No,
Oh, crikey.
no.
Is that because
I
it
have
was,
no idea.
you don't know
No
why?
idea why. My father was not in the army because he was medically unfit,
Right.
and so he continued working in the bank.
When you say your father was medically unfit, what did he suffer
Well, he'd
from?
had cancer as a young man, and I think spent a lot of time in hospital.
Oh, not very
So,
good.
no.
And can you remember back to your school days? What's the earliest memory that you have of school?
My very first day at this little private school, we were in South London by then, and it was break time, mid-morning, and we were seated round the gas fire, and come along, children, we have our third of a pint of milk. No, I don't like milk. Oh, come along, dear, we all have it. So I was given my bottle of milk, probably with a straw in it, and I tipped it up and poured it all down myself.
Really?
And I was never asked to drink milk again.
So from a very early age, you were very independent.
A bit bolshy.
Okay, and if you now look at beyond that, when is the first time that you've got some really true memories?
Oh, I can remember the war. I can remember. Although I was under sort of 5, I could recognise which were German planes and which were English planes going over,
Mhm.
and I collected shrapnel from the garden.
Oh,
I mean, we were bombed occasionally, not often,
yeah.
but the German planes on their way back from bombing London, if they'd got any leftover bombs, would drop them on the coast.
Well.
So our church was demolished
Yes.
and a few houses.
And you went from junior school at 6. Did you do something called 11 plus, or was that
Yes.
okay?
By then we were living in Surrey. My
You
father
moved again.
Oh yes, my father was moved first of all to South London, which he didn't like at all. And then, so I think we were there for about 3 years, and I can't remember anything apart from the milk incident about school there. Then we moved to Hazelmere on the Surrey-Sussex borders. And in between, my father moved to Hazelmere but hadn't got anywhere to live. And so my mother and I spent one term living with my grandparents in Lewes, in East Sussex. And I went to a primary school there for one term. And the first day of the term was Empire Day. And we all went off in a crocodile down to a local cinema to, I guess, be shown films of the Empire.
Can you remember those films?
No, not at all.
So you spent probably a fair amount of time with your grandparents.
Well, we lived with them for, I suppose, 3 or 4 months, who had a very modest cottage. We had gas lights, no indoor loo, no bathroom. Her bath was a tin bath in front of the range.
Yeah, well, that goes back a bit.
I know. Yes.
And what were the names of your grandma and grandpa?
Gosh, he was Robert, and she was actually Ada Elizabeth. But she hated the name Ada and was never called it. I don't know what she was called. She was just Nanny. To me, she was Nanny.
Okay.
Nanny and Grandpa.
And when you left, if we say primary school, as it were,
yes,
what was the name of the school that you went to after that?
Godalming Grammar School.
Was that just a girls' school?
Oh no, and that was a mixed grammar school. About I don't know how many miles from where we lived, but I went by train to school. Yeah.
And if you started secondary school, as we call it now, and you were streamed at this school?
No.
So it was everyone in.
It was everybody who had passed the 11 plus. That was in the days of grammar schools or secondary modern. I was the only girl who passed the 11 plus in my school.
Well.
In my year.
Clever girl. And did you have any subjects at your secondary school that you can think of, that's where I want to go, that's the sort of career I want to follow?
There was very little careers advice in those days. Girls were expected to either be secretaries, teachers, or nurses.
I can believe that.
My father, because of his many times in hospital, which had been in St Thomas's in London, although he didn't live in London. So I, without even thinking about it, said I would do nursing.
So that's what you went into?
So I was given a place at St Thomas's Hospital in London, but you couldn't start until you were 19. And I left school at 18. But I was asked, my headmaster at the grammar school was a Quaker. And the Quakers had set up post-war something that they called the American Friends Service Committee. And they wanted to do school exchanges so that young people would get to know each other and reduce the chance of hostility. And I was chosen to be an exchange student, to go to America for a year.
What a fantastic opportunity.
Absolutely.
But just before we move on to that, so at secondary school, not putting too fine a point on it, but you were now introduced to boys.
Yes.
And did you have a first love at secondary school, or?
Not at school. Um, um, no, for something, there were people from other schools came to our school. I'm not sure what it was for, maybe debates or something like that. And I met a boy from the grammar school in Guildford. And so, yes,
So that was your first
I suppose it was.
introduction to romance, I suppose.
I suppose so, yes. I used to go and watch him play rugby.
Can you remember what his name was?
Tim.
Tim.
And he went into the RAF.
Did he survive the war?
Oh, this wasn't wartime.
Ah, okay. Of course,
No.
it was well on, wasn't it?
No. Oh, yes, yes.
Did you keep in touch during the years?
I can't remember whether we kept in touch while I was in America. But we did meet up again when I came back. But shortly after I came back from America, I met my husband. And so
Okay. So where did you meet your husband?
in Hazelmere. He was a dentist, a dental surgeon, and he was in lodgings with a lady a few miles out of Hazelmere. And I think he'd had a girlfriend. And it broken up, and she got fed up with him hanging around the house. Said, "Oh, for heaven's sake, go and do something. Go and do some amateur dramatics," which he did. Now, I had been doing amateur dramatics for some time, since I was mid-teens, I suppose. And they were doing a Shakespeare. Gosh, what was it? I think Much Ado About Nothing. And because I'd been in America, I wasn't there when they cast it. And so they said, "Would you mind doing the prompting?" So I said, "No, that's fine." And I went off to one of the rehearsals, and I saw him. Thought, he'll do.
And his name?
It was Glenn.
Glyn.
Glenn, yes.
And did he have a middle name as well?
He was actually Donald Glenn.
Ah, but he used Glyn as his main name.
The practice that he was in at the time, which was in Hazelmere, they had another person called Don. And so they said, "Well, we can't have two Dons. What's your middle name?" And so he became Glyn.
Okay. So how old were you at this point?
19.
19. So you met Glyn when you were 19?
Yes.
As a result of doing some prompting and amateur dramatics.
I think I said more of his lines than he did. He was no threat to Laurence Olivier at all.
I like it. So obviously you got married.
Yes.
How many years later did you get married?
Just over a year.
So you were married at 20?
21.
21. And
21.
Glyn was how old?
30.
Oh, so he's a good sort of 10 years older.
9 years.
So
exactly 9 years.
So you were his toy girl.
That picture beside you is taken about 1 minute after he proposed to me.
Well. I mean, you were obviously a very attractive lady. I mean, you must have had men sort of looking at you and thinking, I'm in with a chance here, I'll go and chat this one up.
I don't recall. No.
Would you say, I mean, you don't come across at all, Anne, as being a shy, reticent person.
No.
So
that's true.
Presumably, when Glyn decided, or you decided that you were going to get together, there wasn't much he could do about it.
Oh, he was seeing 2 or 3 other girls at the same time. There was a classic, the Whitsun Bank holiday, 3 days, and his parents came down, and his parents wanted to know all about his life. And so we thought, right, I'll confuse them. So he brought a different girl on each of the 3 days.
I like it. What a story.
And I was the one on the 3rd day, by which time they had perfected their interrogation techniques.
So is it a matter of being third time lucky?
Well, they didn't approve of me at all.
No?
Oh, no. I hadn't been to university.
Oh,
and I was a shop assistant.
Okay, look, let's just pause for a minute there. Okay, so you were married,
Yes.
and where did you live when you were married?
Woodstock. Glyn, by then, had moved to practice in Oxford. And so we lived in Woodstock.
And how long were you in Woodstock for?
18 years.
18 years, so quite a long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Glyn's practice was
You know,
successful.
Oxford and Harley Street.
Yes. Oh, he worked in Harley Street,
Yes.
so obviously fairly
Yeah.
successful.
Well, he was with a professional partner, and they had a house in Harley Street.
And at what point did you start to consider, well, we perhaps we should have some children?
Oh, we didn't even discuss it. We didn't even discuss it. It was just taken for granted. And I was still 21 when I had my first daughter.
Ah, and your first daughter's name is
Penny.
Penny. Nice name. I like Penny. And what does she do now?
She's a dental hygienist.
Ah, so following in father's
As is
footsteps.
her sister, who followed a couple of years later. No pressure from Glyn at all, but they watched him at work and saw how much he loved his work and his profession. And so they're both still doing it.
And your second daughter's name is?
Sarah.
Sarah.
Yes.
One of the things that I read is that the highest rate of suicide in the UK, and I think America, is dentists.
Really?
And I believe that the reason given for that is because a lot of people, I'm one of them,
can't bear
to go to a dentist. No. Absolutely. And well, I suppose it's a little bit of fear. But of course, in days gone by, NHS dentistry was based on, they would literally hollow out the whole of one side of your teeth and then fill
with not very much painkiller.
With not very much painkiller.
Yes.
So obviously, if he enjoyed his job, he was
loved it and was very good at it.
Good.
Now you haven't asked. Now Glyn, in his past, when he did his national service, which was deferred until he was qualified because the army thought they could make more use of him as a dentist, became the dental officer at Spandau Prison and treated Admiral Hess, Admiral Dönitz and Rudolf Hess.
My goodness me. That is absolutely phenomenal. Well. I mean, Spandau, Hess was there for what? 15, 20 years, was it something like that?
I think he was mentally disturbed by then.
Did your husband have an opportunity of speaking to him, or?
Well, I think only professionally. Well, obviously, any time they were treated, there was a guard present, but they were only allowed. They had metal dentures, which were taken away from them, except at meal times, in case they used them to
commit suicide.
Yes.
Well, what an interesting situation to be in.
Yes.
So did he ever discuss it? Did he ever have any reservations about dealing with this guy?
No, they were patients. You treated them professionally, and that was it.
So at this time, whilst you're married to your husband and you got this practice in Harley Street and Oxford, what were you doing at that time?
Well, I suppose for the first few years I was occupied with small children.
Yeah.
We then we started life in a rented flat, and then we bought a house which had one cold tap, and that was it. So we spent a considerable time doing that up. Yes. I mean, not us personally, but having it done up to make it habitable. So that was that. And then, we were both involved in things in the town. Glyn went on the borough council, I think only for 3 years. And I was involved with Women's Institute. I started a trolley shop at the local old people's home.
And how old are we talking about now?
How old was I?
Yes.
Oh, mid-20s.
Okay.
And then I was invited to become a magistrate. when I think I was one of the youngest in the country. I was 28 when I
28,
became a
very
magistrate.
young for a magistrate. Absolutely, yes, that is young. So, can you remember your first time on the bench?
I can remember various times on the bench. Because I dealt with juvenile work and domestic work and criminal work. I remember one young man who must have been a sort of late teenager, a surly youth. And I suppose and he was talking. I said, have you got a job? Yeah. Do you enjoy your job? And his face lit up. He loved whatever he was doing. And so we didn't send him aside. Gave him a community order.
Well, did you have any sort of notorious cases that you had to look at?
No, I don't think so. We were a
local
country bench in Woodstock. So,
and how long did you do that for? Huh?
Well, I did it until we left Oxfordshire. So I did it for 23 years.
And when you left Oxfordshire, where did you go then? I mean, your children are now sort of getting.
Oh, hang on, we've had another one in the meantime.
Oh.
Where were we?
So, what was the name of the third child?
The third child was Laura, our Laura, who lives in Tavistock.
So 3 girls.
3 girls. And she was a very late baby, but she was not a mistake because Glyn got broody. Not me. We were on holiday in a little Greek island, and there was a Cambridge professor with 2 little girls. And Glyn got broody. And by then our girls were a bit large. He couldn't go and paddle in the sea with them. They were awful. So he got broody, and I sort of said, oh, all right.
So how old were you when Laura was? So
I was 39 when Laura was born.
39.
Yes.
And at that point, you decided to leave Oxfordshire, or
where are we? No. We're still in Oxford. We moved from Woodstock into Oxford itself because Glyn's partner retired, and so we moved into the practice house, which was one of these huge North Oxford Victorian houses with surgeries, all the surgeries on the ground floor. We lived in the middle, and we had a large flat in the middle, and we had 5 undergraduates on the top floor.
What, that rented the top floor from you?
Yes.
That must have been fun.
Yes.
If a challenge. Okay, so you're now in
Oxford.
In Oxford City,
yes,
as it were, and obviously Glyn's still doing his dentistry. Yes. What are you doing now at this time?
Well, I'm on the bench. Yeah. Which by then I'd been on for a while, and so I was fairly senior. So it was actually took up quite a lot of my time with one thing and another. We were both fairly involved in the church, so that sort of thing. Yes.
And did you enjoy sitting as a magistrate?
Enjoy is not the right word, but it was very interesting. Introduces you to a side of life that you wouldn't otherwise come across. Glyn never met people who tried to run their electricity off the street light because they couldn't afford it.
Did it change your attitude to life in general? By that I mean, you've obviously got a certain set of values up until that point, and now you see all these people in a different
light. I suppose it makes you think how fortunate you are, when so many people have drawn a very short straw. It also, you learn to look at both sides of things. You shouldn't have preconceived ideas or take the first thing that comes. You listen to both sides and weigh them up, and your views might change.
So, as I understand it, a magistrate court, you then are responsible for giving out your judgment on a particular case. Do you have advisors that
you have a legal? Your clerk is legally qualified, so he will tell you whether what you want to do is legal, whether you can do that in those circumstances. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're coming to an end now of the magistrate bit, and
So that was when we moved. Now, why did we move? Well, we've always done things a bit on impulse. Um, our relaxation, I mean, apart from holidays, we used to go riding on the Black Mountains, because when you live over the surgery, if you're not careful, your weekend, there are things to do. Because I was fairly involved. I did all the paperwork for the surgery, I did the laundry, paid the staff, did the income tax and all this sort of thing. And there were always things that Glenn could have done. So we got away. And we used to go riding in the Black Mountains in Wales. I have a friend who still lives in that border, the Welsh Marches. And I'd always liked that sort of part of the world. And so I suppose I probably got itchy feet. And so we started looking for property and fell in love with a 16th century farmhouse, which had one habitable bedroom.
So now you're on to having to do yet another house.
So we moved. Yes, we moved to the Welsh borders near Hay-on-Wye. Spent 2 years doing up this house, which was grade 2 star listed, so you had to be pretty careful as to what you were doing. And we had a very good team of workmen who came in and did, there was one who was a specialist in sort of lime plaster, and a very good carpenter who worked on the restoration of Windsor Castle, did some of the woodwork. Yeah.
So you managed to get this into a habitable state?
We got it into a habitable state. It had 13 acres of land, which went with it, including a woodland and a stream. For the first 2 winters, we had horses. The trekking ponies that we'd used on the Black Mountains were always sent down to warmer pasture for the winter. And so we had 4 of them, and used to go riding with these horses.
Was that sort of your major relaxation activity? Because, I mean, Hay-on-Wye, famous for books.
Famous for books, yes. Well, you were pretty busy doing up the house. Relaxation.
I mean, did you listen to music a lot? I mean, you obviously read a lot.
Yes, I read a lot. Glyn was less of a reader because he was more scientific and tended, to read textbooks and read them very slowly and carefully. I read quite fast, don't necessarily take it all in, but yes, I suppose so. And again, tiny little village churches, which was such a contrast to our church in Oxford, which was a very exceptional church. I was the church warden. We had 1,000 people for the morning service. We had students sitting on the window ledges and on the floor.
My goodness me.
It was, yes.
Now, that is a little unusual.
That's a church with a reputation. And then in the evening, I would literally, it was like a pub landlady saying, ain't you got homes to go to? Come on, it's 9 o'clock. I want to go home.
So now, here we are in, the outskirts of Wales. And,
a very rural community.
Yes. And you're busy doing the house. Doing riding when you can. A little bit of other things.
Yes.
So what was the next?
What did we... I forget when we started keeping chicken. And then on a whim and without consulting me, Glyn bought 10 sheep.
So now you become a shepherdess.
Now become Glyn was doing a course to become a bereavement counsellor. And one of the other people on the course said, I've got 10 sheep. We can't keep them any longer. Would anybody like them? And Glyn said, yes, please.
Sounds like a character.
So these 10 sheep turned up. 9 white ones and 1 black one. And there's a story of a black sheep from our big church in Oxford. Glyn and I used to administer communion to people.
Mm-hmm.
And Glyn had a tie which he'd bought in America, which was red with white sheep, but 1 black one in the middle. And somebody told him afterwards that as he was kneeling at the communion rail, he nearly spluttered into the communion wine when he suddenly saw this black sheep on his tie.
So it was good that you were both. Okay, so it was good that you were both interested in the church
yes.
and able to do things
Yes.
together.
Yes.
But now we're coming on to the next stage, which is
the sheep.
The sheep, and did we think we were going to become farmers?
Well, we were. We'd also had cattle one summer, but the house had been a bit of a bottomless pit. When you've got a building like that,
yes,
you can't spoil a ship for a hay with a tar.
No.
And so Glyn went back to work part-time, and we started doing fairly upmarket bed and breakfast with an organisation called Wolsey Lodges, which are largely historic houses. Mm-hmm. So we did that.
So how old are you now?
Well, when we moved, I was 52. Mm-hmm. The 10 sheep became 100. Well, we had 40 breeding ewes, and then they all had lambs, so we were then 100. So
now, I mean, the only bit that I know about lambing is that it is really hard work, and you've got to be up at the crack of dawn,
or you don't go to bed at all.
I mean, how did that fit in with your lifestyle at that point? I mean, it's all changed.
We worked around it. Glyn used to take 3 weeks off work for lambing because you knew when they were going to come. Mm-hmm. We did a lambing course at Agricultural College in Hereford for a few weeks. Got an NVQ and level 1, both of us. And the most important thing you learnt was you never go out without your waterproof trousers, which you keep on your wellies in the hall. You never know what you're going to be kneeling in.
So how long were you living there?
We were there for 11 years.
Okay.
And what finished it? Partly foot and mouth disease, which we didn't get but came very close. We had, piles of burning animals and couldn't hang a washing out. It smelt, the postman couldn't come. You couldn't do anything. You had disinfectant straw by the gates and all this sort of thing. By then, in 1995, I had been rung up out of the blue and asked whether I would be interested in being on the board of World Vision. Now, I knew absolutely nothing about relief and development at all. And I thought, why on earth do they want me?
Can you just explain what World Vision is?
World Vision is an international relief and development organisation. Operates in 100 countries around the world. It's a Christian organisation, but it works with people of any faith or none. Established after the Korean War, founded by an American, mm-hmm. But it's international and has 30 or 40.
So this came out of the blue to you?
I knew the person who was the chief executive in the UK mm-hmm. office. I knew him partly through church, although they didn't go to our church, and partly because his wife very briefly worked for Glyn for a while. Very nice, lovely couple. And so I thought, why on earth do they want me? And I looked at the list of board members who were frightfully distinguished, some of them. But anyway, I thought about it and I prayed about it. And I thought, yes, no. And so I joined the board of World Vision in 1995.
And what did that entail now? I mean, and also, how did Glyn react to this?
Oh, Glyn has always been supportive. He was always supportive in anything I wanted to do, whatever. He said, go for it, So, yes. And so I joined the board of World Vision and started. And that same year, 1995, they said you ought to go and visit countries in which we work. And that was my first visit to Africa in 1995.
And where did you go in Africa?
Mali.
Right.
It was the first, Mali and Ghana were my first trips.
Mm-hmm. And what was your, I mean, obviously to see what's going on.
Yes.
But did you have any remit as to what you were looking to improve or help with?
That came later in quite a lot of the stuff that I did with World Vision. That first visit, you were really just seeing how it worked on the ground. And I can remember sitting on a mountainside. Oh, my God. No, it wasn't Mali and Ghana that were my first trips. My first trip was Uganda and Ethiopia. And I can recall sitting on a mountainside in Ethiopia with 3 or 4 local men who were literally dressed in rags and were so dignified in their poverty. And looking across at a hill on the other side, and there was a man ploughing with a wooden plough, walking behind a wooden plough. It was biblical.
I bet that was one hell of an experience.
Oh, I've had some amazing experiences. And while I was there up in the mountains, they were digging the foundations for a hospital up there because there were no medical facilities beyond a sort of clinic, which couldn't do much more than sticking plasters. The nearest hospital was 200 kilometers away. And people literally were carrying people on a litter. You could see 4 men walking with somebody on a litter, and they would be walking for 3 or 4 days
to get to the hospital.
So effectively in that community, you either lived or you died. So they were digging the foundations for a hospital, which World Vision were going to build. And I said, I'd love to come back here and see it when it's finished. And 3 years later, I was invited to the opening ceremony.
Fantastic.
And I saw it.
So
I was treated like royalty. We had motorcycle outriders, bouquets. I made a speech which had to be translated. And on my first visit, I was given this rug. And on my second visit, I was given that rug.
Well. And whilst you were doing this, Glyn was at home
and working and looking after the animals.
He must have loved you.
Well, yes. But I mean, I did it as well. We did the animals together.
So how much of your time did this take? I mean, did it become a major part of your life now?
Well, yes. I mean, it opened my eyes to another whole world that I would never otherwise have experienced. I've sat in mud huts with AIDS victims. I remember one woman we visited. She was a widow looking after several grandchildren who'd been orphaned by AIDS. And again, she was dressed very humbly. And somebody said, let me take a photograph of you. And that universal women's gesture, she patted her hair and we took a photograph.
Oh, I don't suppose you can remember her name.
No, I can't. No.
Oh,
But,
dear. But you also told me some time ago that you'd also spent some time in Lebanon.
I've been to Lebanon a couple of times, yes. Yes.
What was the basis of that trip? Still with World Vision?
Still with World Vision, yes. On the first occasion, we were having, we used to have what was called the European Forum. There'd be meetings of representatives from countries in different areas. Europe covered quite a wide area, and the representative from Lebanon used to happen in February. And I think we were in Amsterdam in deep snow, and he said, if you came to Lebanon in February, it would be sunny and warm, you see. So we said, okay. So we went to Lebanon, and you know what happened? It snowed.
Oh, my goodness.
And of course, the had no experience of driving in snow. It was hairy. So that was my first visit. And then I went again a few years later to do what we called a peer review. And I did many peer reviews, which were a small team of an office that raised money, an office that used the money, and a board member going to see the work in a particular country. Not a financial audit, but almost, are you living up to the values of the organisation? You know, are you looking after your staff? And this sort of thing. So,
I mean, how big an organisation was it then?
I want to say it works in 100 countries with 40, 50,000 employees worldwide.
And where does it get funded?
It's miles bigger than Oxfam.
Okay.
Internationally.
Yeah. How does it get funded?
A lot of it is child sponsorship. In what are called the donor countries.
Oh, well. So how long did that as part of your life continue? When did you finish with
I did it for 17 years. I did 10 years in the UK, and we had term limits, so I'd done my term limits. I was chair of it for the last 4 years. And then I was asked to be on the board in Ireland, representing the international president. So I did 7 years.
So don't tell me you moved to Ireland.
Hmm?
Don't tell me you moved to Ireland.
No, I didn't move to Ireland, but I went to Dublin 3 or 4 times a year. Yes.
I mean, you obviously enjoyed that sort of work. It seems to have been a very fulfilling part of it.
It was very rewarding. You met some amazing people.
If you had to sort of highlight one particular time when you were part of this organisation, what would it be? What would be the standout moment for you? I mean, obviously you had a lot, but is there one that really stands out?
I recall a board member from Mali in West Africa, which is a predominantly Muslim country. A lovely man dressed in a sort of long blue robe and blue hat. And he was called Pastor Noah, and he was a Baptist minister. And we were in California, in most incongruous setting, over breakfast. And I said to him, you know, have you always been a Christian? And he told me this amazing story. He was a Muslim family. And as a teenager, for somehow he'd come across some Christians, and they were having a camp. And he told his family he was going to a scout camp, and so they let him go. And when they found out, his mother went to the local imam, I guess, who said, he's better dead than being a Christian. So they locked him in a shed at the bottom of in the compound and gave him poisoned food. And he told me, he said, a voice from God said, don't eat it. And his brother had some of it. Didn't die, but was so ill was never the same again. Eventually, obviously, he got out and had no contact with his family and became a Baptist pastor.
You say you met him or you were having breakfast in California. Was he a
Yes.
Baptist minister in America?
No, in Mali.
Oh, in Mali. So he was still in this Islamic country
Yes.
as a Christian pastor.
And I suspect he's been killed long ago.
I'm sure you're probably right.
But people like that stand out. How else would I have met anybody like that?
Oh, absolutely. Let's just pause there for a second. We've now been part of this organisation for, did you say 17 years?
17 years.
17 years. So you're now how old?
Well, I was in my I think I was 73
Right.
when I retired.
When you retired at 73. That's a fairly long career, isn't it?
Well,
you know,
different things.
Different things,
Different
a fairly
things.
long
Yes.
career.
Yeah.
And presumably your daughters are now married?
They're all married. Yes.
And children? You have grandchildren?
I have 9 grandchildren.
9 grandchildren. Okay, here's a test.
8 great grandchildren and 2 more on the way.
Oh, goodness me.
And I'm an only child.
Okay, here's a test for you then, Anne. 8 grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, give me the names.
Oscar and Mia, Letty and Ivo, Teo, Finley, Anna and Emma.
Very good.
Emily.
And great-grandchildren?
Oh, sorry, those were the great-grandchildren.
Oh,
those were the great-grandchildren. Okay. The grandchildren are, let me see, Tom, Jamie and Oliver, Alex, Ginny and Claudia, and Ned, Tess and Celie.
Very, very good. And you've got 2 on the way? 2
more on the way.
And
one in Australia.
They're living in Australia?
I have a grandson who lives in Australia.
Oh,
married to an Australian.
Yeah. Oh, good. Have you ever been to Australia?
For 24 hours.
How did you get 24 hours in Australia?
At the end of a cruise.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
So it was a stopping off point.
It was on the way home. Yes.
Okay. So after you retired,
yeah.
Okay, are you in good health?
Well, I have my lung condition, had been diagnosed by then. And so good health. Reasonable.
And Lynn?
Oh, yes.
So at what point then did your life change again? I mean, from that point, 73, you've retired. You ain't going to sit still and do nothing.
73, where were we living? We were living here by then. We had given up the farm. There was foot and mouth, as I say.
Yes.
And we were not cold, but we had said to each other, if we were cold, would we start again? And the answer was no. And I was doing much more traveling then for World Vision. Mm-hmm. And so in 2002, we moved to another place on the Welsh border, about 25 miles away, near Crickhowell, further south. Glyn was still working in Crickhowell, part-time. We did say to each other that if we were cold, would we start again? And the answer was no, we wouldn't at our age, because that was, 2002.
So Glyn would have been what, 82?
71.
Oh, sorry, I've gone too far.
He was 71.
Yeah, okay.
And I was 62.
Right.
Yeah. So we then, we sold the farm and we moved, as I say, to near Crickhowell, where he was working, just part-time, 2 or 3 mornings a week, something like that. And I was still traveling. So, yeah. But by then, my condition was getting a bit worse, but I was still able to travel as long as, I had a wheelchair at the airport. You know how
Mm.
vast airports can be. And so, yes.
So you then, at this sort of age, what was the next stage of your life, if you like?
Well, in the meantime, I suppose my trips to Africa, and I'd done a lot of trips to Africa, and I loved it. And so, you know, um, then we started traveling. Once we'd given up the farm, um, we could travel. Um, and I had come into some money, and so we spent it all on travel. We would have 5 or 6 trips every year.
And were they cruises, or did you do
Latterly,
trekking?
they became cruises. Um, as I was less mobile, we did a lot of safaris because I could climb into a vehicle and sit, and we're both interested in wildlife and birds and that sort of thing. And so we did lots of safaris
Mhm.
in various countries in Africa. Um, and then, say, as my mobility got less, I thought, well, we'll try a cruise. And the first one we did was the Norwegian fjords, on the principle that even if I couldn't get off and do the expeditions, I'd still be able to see
Mm.
quite a lot. In the event, I did most of the stuff. I didn't walk up the glacier like Glid did, but I managed to see most of it.
Mm.
We only ever did small boat cruising. We did expedition cruising, which we loved, where you go off in small, rigid inflatables. So we've done a lot of that
Mm.
in some
So
interesting
would you say that that was a particular stage of your life, this traveling,
traveling, yes,
and
and family. By then, we moved down to Tavistock in 2007 because our youngest daughter lived here, and
that's Laura, yeah?
that's Laura. And she said it would be nice if you came to live a bit nearer to us. And we said, no, no, we're perfectly happy where we are. Thank you very much. And she kept saying, I found somewhere for you. And we said, well, if we move, we should downsize to a flat. I think I found a flat. We looked at one or two with her. And then we saw one and we said, yes, that would do. Right in the middle of Tavistock.
Mhm.
And we bought it brand new and downsized dramatically. But that was fine. It meant you could lock up and go on all these travels. So that's what we did.
So,
We helped look after the grandchildren, took them to school or fetched them from school or babysat.
mhm. So then from there, how did you end up then moving into the care
Into
home?
here.
What was the
What was the trigger? We were in our flat. Um, Glenn had problems uh, with his larynx while we were living in Wales, and had 1 or 2 biopsies, which had all been absolutely fine. And then in 2018, he had a biopsy which wasn't fine, and it was cancer, very aggressive. He was diagnosed on a Thursday, and the following Monday he had surgery.
so it was
It was,
pretty aggressive.
yes, yes.
Was there any connection between him contracting that and your life being farmers, in inverted commas?
Oh, I don't think so.
No.
No,
No.
I don't think so. So he had, I'd say, major surgery, after which he couldn't speak. Um, he had a thing called an electrolarynx, um, which he held, but people found it a bit difficult
Mm. Mm.
to understand him. Uh, but he was still, um, you know, fit, and we lived right in the middle of Tavistock, so we
Yes.
could go out and do our shopping. And I had a mobility scooter, and then latterly he had one as well because his breathing became more difficult. Um, but we managed until September of 2022, really. And then we realized we weren't managing terribly well on our own. We both knew and had said, we could neither of us. If anything happened to one of us, neither of us could manage on our own. We knew that. We did have carers in, but it didn't work terribly well. Unpromising start when the first one we had didn't know how to boil an egg for Glyn's breakfast. But there we go. It didn't really work. They'd never seemed to be there when you wanted them, or you were conscious of the time. And I was thinking, what am I going to get them to do? And so.
And it's an intrusion into your own privacy as well.
Yes, yes. And so in January 23 last year, we moved here.
How did the family react to you doing that?
I think they thought it was sensible.
So they supported the move?
Oh, absolutely.
And they supported this place, which?
We didn't even look at any places. It was COVID. You couldn't go and visit.
Wow. So how did you actually...
But my son-in-law is a GP.
Okay.
In Tavistock.
Right.
And
he knew about this place?
Well, he knew all the care homes in the neighbourhood.
And said, this is the one that you're going to go to?
Yes. He said, this was the best.
And you both moved in here together?
Together, yes.
And
yes.
Unfortunately, you weren't in very long and
no,
passed away.
Died 5 weeks to the day.
That must have been extraordinarily difficult.
It was not unexpected because he was failing. But when it happened, it was very sudden. But the staff here were very good.
But I mean, you end up from, if you look back on your life and your career, I mean, it brings sort of goosebumps on the back of my neck. And I think to myself, all of that, you've clearly got all your marvels. You are clearly a very intelligent and well-versed lady. And here you are now on your own in a home. And it seems such a massive change. How do you cope with that?
It is a massive change. And it's not easy. I mean, for the first few weeks that I was here, I hated coming back. And it wasn't until I'd been here probably 3 or 4 months, which was after Glyn had died, that when we turned in the drive and I thought, it's not home, but I live here.
Yes, I understand what you mean.
Yes. And you make the best of it. I'm a pretty pragmatic person, so you deal with them. So I'll say you're dealt.
How do you spend your days here now? What would be typical day?
I have the paper every day. I read it from cover to cover. Yeah. I do the crosswords.
So I noticed a headline on that newspaper. That must have been quite something for you to take in.
Archbishop. I knew people who went to those camps. Never talked about what happened. What appalls me is the BBC. Every time this comes up, they show that man's face on the screen. And I think, what must his victims feel when they see that face?
Yes.
I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's a shame, but I think it's the right thing to do.
Yes. I mean, I think that my view, and it's not about my view is that if he knew and failed in his position to do something right,
to investigate more thoroughly. When you've been told that something's been referred to the police, you should check what's happening with that report.
Well, the $64,000 question, does that sort of issue affect your faith?
No.
Why?
Why? We're all fallible. The Archbishop is as fallible as anybody. God is greater than all of it.
That's nice. So,
interestingly, in my World Vision work, there was the peer review of how they were doing with the work and were they keeping up with the values. And I introduced, with a motion at our big international conference, which happened every 3 years, that child protection should be introduced as one of the things that was looked at.
Why did you do that?
I have no idea. I think it was God gave me that. It hadn't really crossed my path very a certain amount in juvenile courts, but no.
So
So
it
it
pushes
became,
timing as well.
it became part of what people looked at when they were assessing the work in a country.
Okay, lovely. Well, thanks for that interview, Anne. I really do appreciate it. And one of the things that I'm going to do with it is put it and store it in one of these little containers so that 100 years from now, some people are going to pick this up and see, oh, that's interesting, how life is different today.
Yes.
And, a time capsule, basically.
Yes.
But if you had, always a difficult question, but if you had to give advice, given your life, which has been a very full life, if you had to give your advice now to the youngsters of today, what advice would it be?
Oh, I think make the most of every opportunity. Gosh, I sent a message rather similar to that to, I think, my youngest grandson, who's 20. Live every day to its full and take every opportunity. Don't wait for tomorrow.
A bit late if you do.
You never know what's around the corner.
It's true. So, just a few offhand questions now. What's your favourite piece of music?
Oh, goodness. I've got fairly wide musical tastes, although I don't like jazz. I quite like folk, classical music. That's a favourite piece.
Well, if we had to put a piece of music as background music to this interview, what would you like it to be?
Probably Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings.
Okay, that's what it will be. Favourite book?
Oh, gosh. Again, my tastes are fairly eclectic, although they're largely non-fiction. I've read Gone with the Wind several times, partly because I've visited the Deep South. Gilbert's Diary, which is set on the Welsh borders, and I know the places that he's talking about. He talks about mentions our farm. Yeah, anyway, let's leave it there.
Okay. And favourite film?
Not a film lover at all.
So you don't.
I was frightened by a film when I was young, and I've never liked films since.
What was the film?
Oliver Twist.
Oh, well. Yes, now I'll tell you a little story. My mum was frightened of books because she read many, many years ago, obviously many years ago because she'd been gone a few years, she read Edgar Allan Poe's The Pendulum.
Don't know that.
It's literally, it's a torture method where a pendulum swings over a body and it's a knife. But there's a part in that book where a person dies, a lady dies, and they put her in the coffin and off she goes. She's not dead. And it scared my mother to death. And I always remember she said to me, Stephen, when I die, please make sure that I'm dead. I was 14 at the time. I remember it so well because I remember, Mum, I promise you that's what I'll do. And when she died, I tried very hard to do that. It broke my heart that I couldn't, because she'd been dehydrated to such an extent that the funeral home said it's not a good idea to come and see your mum in the state that she's in now.
Yeah.
So things like that can affect you. So
Yes.
films I can
Yes. I mean,
believe.
I've seen films, but
Yes.
I would never choose
No.
to go
What
to a
about
film.
television? Do you watch a lot of television?
Yes, quite a lot of television. What do I watch? History, natural history,
Mhm.
some of the cookery things, you know, MasterChef, Ben Fogel, Life in the Wild.
Do you like any of the dramas?
Never watched the dramas.
Mhm.
Never. None of the
Quite the
period
opposite.
costume things. None of them.
Mm.
Never watched any of them.
Interesting. So if you had to say now, as a final question, a person in your life that has had the most influence on you, who would that be? Excluding your husband.
Oh, that was my parents. Had a strong influence on me. In a way, I suppose, the headmaster of my grammar school who gave me that opportunity to travel all those years ago.
Hmm. It set the
It
path
did.
of your life.
Yes, it did.
Hmm.
Yes.
Well, good. Well, thanks very much, Anne.
You didn't ask me about my grandparents. I lived with my grandparents, as
Oh,
I
I
say,
didn't. No,
for
please.
about a term.
Mhm.
My grandmother, last weekend for remembrance, I was wearing a pin that the British Legion produced for women in the First World War. My grandmother drove an ambulance in the First World War, and I regret that I didn't ask her about it.
No, and that's the problem, you see. Memories that people have, which seem so unimportant to the individual at the time, um, they are important. You know, we all make up the tapestry of life, don't we? And things need to be recorded and remembered, and that's the main reason for this interview.
It influenced my life in that my mother was 7 when her mother went off to drive the ambulance. And my mother was left to live with a grandmother, and she didn't enjoy the experience at all. And I think she never forgave her mother for it.
Oh,
And it affected their relationship. And that coloured my relationship with my grandmother.
your relationship with your grandmother seemed, from what you said, to have been reasonably good.
Yes, but yes. And she came to live with us latterly, and I used to go and see her. But yeah, we didn't chat. We didn't. You're not curious about these things when you're younger, by and large.
Yes.
It's not until you get older and you look back, and then you're curious, more curious. Yeah.
Okay, just to give you an opportunity now. I mean, your children will
Yes.
obviously see this
Regularly.
interview when I've done it. Is there anything that you'd like to pass on as a message to them?
I think the same one. Enjoy every day and be positive. I say my prayers every night, and every night, no matter how dull, there is always something to be thankful for.
I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you very much.